like to call this Saline City Council meeting to order. If you'd please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, members present this evening are myself, Mayor Morrow, Council members Gearboss, CO, Mitchell, Dillon, and Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. From city staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, Police Chief Hart, City Superintendent Engineer Rubel, DPW Director Fortes, as well as a few other department heads. The rest of you who are in the audience this evening, we welcome you. We encourage you to sign in the back to my left. You can also pick up an agenda on the back table. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted unless there are amendments.
So moved.
Moved by Dillon, seconded by Mitchell. Was that to approve, ladies?
Yes.
As submitted? Thank you. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. I should have noted at your at the dais this evening is a letter that Kristen Mitchell has provided from Terry Seibo Koenig, as well as a revised version of the resolution regarding the ballot proposal that we hope is on the November ballot. And there is a hard copy of Police Chief Hart's PowerPoint, which he will be sharing momentarily. At this time, then, the chair would entertain a motion to excuse the absence of our colleague Heidi McClellan.
So moved.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. All those in favor of excusing the absence signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We move on to the presentation portion of tonight's agenda, and we have the quarterly police department report from our police chief, Jared Hart. Chief Hart, we appreciate you being here this evening, and as soon as you are ready, you may begin your presentation.
Our residents are calling for a need for more traffic enforcement throughout our community, and our officers have risen to the occasion. This is a 3-year quarterly comparison. The yellow line represents traffic stops in our community. The red line represents tickets. So they're about 50%, which is a little bit higher than what I've experienced in my previous employer for a ratio, but the officers are out there doing a great job. This is our top 20 calls for service in the second quarter. You could see a lot of our top 5 to 10 are mostly speeding citations, traffic citations, improper lane use. We do have some assist citizens, suspicious circumstances. When I was here to give the first quarterly report, we talked about suspicious persons and suspicious circumstances in vehicles and wanting to focus and get our public to focus on the behavior. So if you see a lot of my Facebook posts and other posts that I have out there on Twitter, it really talks about if you see suspicious behavior, immediately alert the nearest police officer during the Celtic Festival or the July 4th fireworks or the Memorial Day parade. So reinforcing with the public that we want folks to focus not on race, not on sex, nor dress. We simply want to know what behavior is suspicious, so responding officers can focus on that. I still don't know what happened there in 2017 at the top. There must have been a sale on PBT tests, 231 PBT tests here at the police department, and it's about double of 2016. Now you could see over in 2018 we're at about 40. Preliminary breath test, so usually court ordered preliminary breath test. Instead of paying the fees to get the equipment placed in vehicles, when someone is arrested for drunk driving, they can come to a police department, and we recently raised our fees from $5 to $10 to be consistent with surrounding agencies. This is a 3-year crime comparison. I like to take at least a 3-year look at, as you could tell in our statistics. It kind of gives us a good baseline. Criminal sexual conduct, I'll just reiterate from the last quarter as well, as those are very tragic situations, but unfortunately, and even more tragic, usually the victim and the offender have some type of relationship. So that's sad in and of itself, but The key to pointing that out is we don't have someone lurking around our downtown area pulling people away and assaulting them. Most of our non-aggravated assaults happen to be domestic violence, another tragic statistic there, as those are charged as a non-aggravated assault. You see our larcenies are still pretty consistent at about 27. When it says cleared 18 year to date and cleared 17 year to date, those are either through arrest or through an uncooperative victim or death of offender or a couple of other categories that the government allows us to put those under. So it might be an arrest and it might be cleared otherwise. It could be that the prosecutor didn't have enough information to charge someone. So at that point, we get an exceptional clearance. Again, looking at our fraud, we're tracking more than double that we were this time last year, but also fairly consistent with 16. This year, the trend, as I've stated before, is the unemployment insurance fraud. Lately, we're seeing text fraud where someone's texting a number, someone replies to it, hey, I lost your number, I lost your information, can I have that information? And folks are sharing a lot of personal information that could ultimately be used to compromise their identity and open up accounts in their name. I'm sorry, I want to go back. Looking at our total Part A and B incidents, we've had 162 so far this year. And there are a couple of crimes that are not up there. They're miscellaneous criminal offenses. They don't really have a category that fits, so they just label it miscellaneous criminal offenses. So there's actually about 174 total crimes, and our clearance rate being up around 42.6%. It's a little higher if you throw in those miscellaneous criminal offenses. But most of our things like OUILs, which is drunk driving, OWPD, which is driving with the presence of drugs, disorderly conduct, obstructing, and trespassing, those are generally things that officers find on patrol. So those will most likely always have a very high clearance rate to them. Our total Part A crimes are 145. 53 have been cleared for a 36.55% clearance rate. If you look to other years, we're really working hard to get that clearance rate up. I personally would like to see it north of 50%. So there's some things that we're looking at the department to try to change that and increase that clearance rate, because that's really how successful we are at solving crime in our community. Here's our overall arrests for the second quarter. You see we had this year 11 felony arrests, 59 misdemeanor for a total of 70. Not sure what happened in 2016 other than I think there was a large party involving a lot of juveniles, maybe underage drinking, because there were 19 juvenile arrests, which of course bumped up the majority of the other categories for 2016. Building partnerships with our community is very important. One of the platforms I use is social media. You could see our ladies from the quilting season, Mary Lindquist and specifically, had made some quilts with her colleagues. They dropped them off to the police department. We have them in heat-sealed bags. We have them in the back of our squad cars with a couple in inventory. So if we come across someone that needs comforting or a child maybe that's been involved in an accident, we can wrap them up with a nice homemade quilt. And it's just kind of an added personal touch from our community. Did a post on our emergency vehicle operations training at MIS. Had a nice little video. Had officers, not the one who was driving, but someone else, take a video driving around the course, going through the Serpentine, so on and so forth. So that training was a pretty big hit, people to watch it. We had Officer Detling leading up to Police Memorial Week. She participated in a several hundred-mile police unity tour along the East Coast. So we did some posts for her and Police Memorial Week. And of course, our dispatchers through National Telecommunicators Week, we also wanted to include them and recognize them. A lot of folks don't associate or remember the dispatchers in law enforcement, and they are quiet, unsung heroes. They're the ones that are answering the phones and talking to the police officers on the radio and supporting staff members. I again promised you that I would do everything that I could to ingrain myself in the community. These are some of the things that I have done personally, be it the summer music series. Now, Mrs. Hart did need me last Thursday at home to help unpack all our boxes as we moved into the area, so I did miss that. But I've been on the Justice with Honor radio show with Lucy Ann and Dan Klebos, the assistant professor of Department of Justice and Public Policy at Concordia. We had a great half-hour discussion on a radio show. Downtown Business and Property meeting, a walking program with the Saline Area Senior Center. They're up top. That's their picture. We walk every Thursday at 9 a.m. around the community. It's a great way to get to know folks. Law enforcement and superintendent meeting at our Washtenaw County Intermediate School District. I've been kind of, I don't want to say raffling off, but allowing folks to kind of raffle off for fundraisers for their school, ride with the chief in the parade, get a ride to on the last day of school with the chief, things like that. So I've had a couple of folks take me up on that offer, and it's been a riot so far. Building esprit de corps, that feeling of pride, fellowship, and common loyalty shared by members of a group. It's very important to me to build this department up and to have a sense of esprit de corps. Now there's a danger, things can go too far, and I certainly don't want anyone covering up for another member's misbehavior. So it's a fine line of having that, commonality with your peers, but also being able to hold them accountable personally and letting a supervisor know if someone crosses a line. So I'm a constant presence at briefing, constant verbal and written communication. Challenge coins, which are on the lower right-hand corner, that's something that I'll be paying for the officers. They've designed the coins, and they're gonna buy them themselves, but I am gonna spring for the fee to kind of strike those coins to get them going. I will be developing and paying for on my own Chiefs Challenge coins that will be handed out when someone goes above and beyond on a great arrest or interrupting a crime, great investigation, things like that. We have little onesies. Mrs. Hart's largely responsible for that. I kind of told her what I wanted, and she went off to the races with it. So that welcome to the family on the police door, it says Saline Police, and that's a three-month and I think a 12-month onesie that we give to department members when they have a birth in the family. So we want them to feel welcome to our family. Again, our dispatcher, one of our dispatchers, Christian Holler, lower left, on Telecommunicators Week, and that's Officer Detling, along with several thousand other police officers from around the country biking into Washington, D.C. I shared some in-progress or active projects with you the last quarter. I want to give you some updates. So the revamp of our communications and officers training manual is complete. Sergeant Hartwig and Dispatcher Holler worked on that together. Mission, vision, values, refresh. Now, that's not the fun stuff. That's not the guns and the cars and things that cops usually like. So that's been a little bit slower to launch and pull some information out of. But Terry Seams and I will be finalizing that. He's one of our dispatchers on June 23rd. Bidding process for uniforms, I'll be meeting on the 20th with Officer Snook. Rebuilding our reserve and cadet programs. We've added 5 cadets. That's Officer Chris Bolter has been out stumping for some candidates to be cadets. They've helped us out as recently as the Celtic Festival, and prior to that, the fireworks. So it's been great having them on board. Reserve Officer Mark Castle was added previously from Northville Township. He did a ride along with me in the early 90s and wanted to come out and be a part of the good things going on in Saline. So he's brought his training and expertise with him to our community. And we have 3 folks that are going to the Reserve Academy that I've signed off on. Now, this is something that they pay for on their own. They're going to go out and we'll get them a uniform and provide the equipment for them. But they're going to pay to put themselves through the academy, and they will graduate sometime in September. So it'll be great to have around 6 or 7 reserve officers that can help us out like they did at the Celtic Festival on July 4th. Those are a force multiplier for us, and we really enjoy the fact that folks want to come out and volunteer in our community. I started a Volunteers in Public Safety, a VIPS program. The kickoff meeting was on June 28th. It was a Thursday. Our first training will be on the 26th. There's approximately 8 to 10 people that will be at that training. And Sergeant Mag and Officer Gauthier, that is their project. And that's part of kind of spreading out the projects and throughout the department to get people more engaged. Is you see a lot of different names up there. So that's by design. Our regional training efforts, a little bit slow to launch. So I've kind of gone out on my own and reached out to a friend that works at the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, MCOLS, and he's a former Los Angeles Sheriff's Deputy. He's worked in Michigan for about 20 years. He's an expert in the training arena, and he's going to come out on November 6th and host a bias-based policing class for us here at the Saline Police Department. We'll open it up to other agencies as well. Expanding the use of Nixle. The last time I was here, we had about 304 people registered. As I put out a Nixle today regarding water over the roads, I did take a peek at the number of registered users, and we're up to 494. And quite honestly, I haven't had a whole lot of time to get out and promote that, so I'm happy to see that folks are spreading the word and kind of sharing that communications platform. You did see some of these future initiatives before. I just want to kind of share them again. The child car seat inspection training, the active killer training, Alice, that will be at the Washtenaw County ISD in September. We're going to send 2 staff members. Former colleague Bob Haig, who's a sergeant with the Detroit Police Department. We've worked on some cases before. He puts on a Don't Get Scammed program. We're going to have that here at the PD on August 22nd at 10 a.m. for our Saline area seniors. They will be visiting us. And this is kind of the top of the flyer for that decision-making, use of force, implicit bias training that we will be hosting on November 6th at the police department. And I stand ready for questions.
Excellent presentation, Chief. Thank you for your leadership and your attendance this evening. Other questions for Police Chief Hart? Start with Councilwoman Mitchell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief Hart, thank you so much for being here tonight. My first request is, could you distribute an electronic copy? As I'm taking notes, I'll be able to refer to it in the next quarter.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much. And then I just missed it a little bit. Would you mind describing the bias-based policing class? I think it was.
Yeah, so Danny Rosa is going to come out, and he's an expert. Talk about implicit bias. We all have it. We have to recognize it. We have to overcome it in our jobs, specifically law enforcement. And how does that play a role into our use of force and our decision-making? So it's something that's probably within the last 1, maybe 2 years has been a trend in law enforcement, and looking at the training records here, it's something that we need. So I wanted to bring that here to the police department, because being 12 officers other than myself, 3 sergeants and 9 officers, it's very difficult to send folks a lot of times out to training, because that means then I have to backfill with overtime or pay the staff members to go on overtime. So I'm trying to reduce that while get as many members as I can into training. So that is just a very important class that I feel every chief should be sending their staff members to.
Well, and as someone who went through that training at the medical school at U of M, it changed how I operated, and I think it's great that you're bringing that to our fleet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Additional questions for the Chief? No. Oh, Councilwoman Dillon?
Oh, quickly, on page 2, with your traffic enforcement, you had made a comment saying that you were surprised that the percentages was 50% higher. Which were you surprised at which number?
So the 325 are the violations. So let's say 700, out of 700 traffic stops, 325 resulted in violations, which is a high percentage for me. Normally it's around 10, 15, 20% of the traffic stops generally does someone get a ticket.
Okay.
So the officers here are out in, they've been told if you can get the message delivered to slow down, stop at the stop sign, more fully, watch your traffic signals, things like that. If you feel that that message can get across with a verbal warning, then certainly do it. But if not, or if it's someone that you've dealt with before, because we have a lot of experienced police officers here, and that was one of the lines I would always give someone when I was a young police officer. I'm going to give you a verbal warning today, but I'm going to be here the next 25 years. So if we happen to bump into each other again, you're probably not going to be so lucky.
Okay, and then my next question was in reference to page, I think it would be page 4, your clearance comparisons. Where does Saline fall in relation to other communities?
That's a great question, and that's something that Sergeant Basso is working on for me. It's my understanding that historically We've been one of the higher percent clearance agencies in our surrounding areas, so Chelsea, Milan, some of the other comparable cities to ours. And it's my understanding, and some of the early data I looked at when I got here, and I can't tell you how reliable the source is, but I do remember looking at some that we are below them now. So that's a concern to me.
Thank you very much. That's
Yes.
all I have.
Thank you. Additional questions? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just a couple. Can you clarify again for me, retail fraud, is that including just within the stores, or is that including?
So retail fraud, you are correct, would be in a store. So something that's offered for sale during store hours and someone leaves without, paying for that object or that merchandise, then that would be a retail fraud. A lot of those, unfortunately, are coming out of a particular store in our community where they refuse to secure alcohol behind the counter and have someone kind of monitoring that.
Okay, so it's really identified with one particular
Yes.
retailer.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Curious, I saw in there obscenity. What exactly do we?
I would have to look at the particular police report on that. I'm going to guess it probably should have been categorized as maybe a disorderly conduct or something along those lines.
I was curious because I didn't think we've seen many of those in a while.
No.
I'd be in big trouble.
And then the only other thing, the Nixle, just the idea of getting people to sign up for Nixle, how we can actually promote that more, because even myself, I didn't realize I had signed up for it, but I was only for Washtenaw County. I wasn't for the city of Saline, so.
Yeah. What really I want to do is carve out some time and do a short video maybe with another staff member, maybe grab someone from the community. I know there's been some suggestions about maybe having some instructions at the front desk on how to sign in to Nixle, and it's through the zip code. But yeah, it's finding the time to really get out there and push some videos out. I did one on our special property checks, where now that's all done. You can do it over the computer now on our website. So that was very well received. So pushing something out like that on our social media platform would probably be one of the best ways to start.
And I really am appreciative of your approach to encouraging more development among the staff and the encouragement within us, the recognition of staff and all of that in terms of providing that, because I know the work culture is a big opportunity to keep staff, but also to encourage them to be part of the whole community, so.
I agree. Employee engagement's huge. That's one way of attaining it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Anything else? Thank you, Chief. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Chris, you can raise the screen. Okay, friends, moving on the agenda. We come to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments?
Mary Hess regarding the Section 18-143, the Fairdean zoning amendment request. There's talk about he's shown a picture of putting a barn on this lot. This is definitely, let's pretend, because the lot is not that big and the barn is. Plus, it's had a fire in it years ago. On one page of the zoning request, it says for consideration. Number 2, it's on the last of one of your, from the subject 8, ordinance 804. It says a small piece of parcel addition and redesign of the combined parcel as depicted on a concept plan would increase the number of residential units from 30 to 44. The increase in density then would go from 7.6 units to 10.6 units, representing an increase of 40%. So in other words, the gentleman, it appears, needs to have this property rezoned in order to have the increase from the 30 units to 44. And it's on your paperwork. I have been probably attending council meetings for over 40 years. I was looking at 2 of them on council. And this is the poorest presentation of a plan that I have ever seen. I'm disappointed that it is not affordable living. Anybody that thinks that over low 200,000s for 1 bedroom is not exactly in a senior category, I don't think. I think that it doesn't fit in the master plan, and I would hope that the council would not rezone this parcel that is needed for him to increase, it appears as it says in the paperwork, from 30 to 44 units. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Are there additional comments on agenda items? Then we'll move on to the consent agenda. Oh, I'm sorry. Please.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm Jen Harmount. I live on Monroe Street, and I live in a 1910 Victorian that was built by Carolyn Reischauer, and she is buried in the cemetery next door. And I just feel like I've seen the plans, and I'm not really sure how this, I just kind of caught up, and I apologize, but I'm not really sure how this fits in with the, historic nature of the street, on Monroe. So I'm just kind of concerned about that. And then having 44, that sounds like more like an apartment complex than a condo complex. That concerns me. And then what is it going to do to the class size over at Pleasant Ridge? How many kids? I feel like we're really at a high count. I don't know that they have the capacity. So then what's that going to do to the class size over at Pleasant Ridge? So I don't know if make sure that council is considered all those things. So thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments on agenda items? Then we'll proceed to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion.
Move to approve as submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Gearba. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Mitchell. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business, item 18-139. This is strategic planning proposal. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 12, 2018 memo from City Manager Campbell and to approve or not to approve the strategic planning proposal from Dr. Lou Bender.
Move to acknowledge and approve.
Thank you, Mr. Seo. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tar. Mr. Campbell, we discussed this at the last council meeting, but do you care to make a brief comment this evening?
Very brief, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, as it states in my memo, this is proposed bringing Dr. Lou Bender back to help with our strategic planning, as well as team strengthening with senior staff and council. We had done this a few years ago, and I think it was very well received. From some past comments at some recent council meetings, council members had mentioned the desire to bring Dr. Bender back, as well as to, you may recall from the most recent strategic planning was much later in the year than it usually is, and so this would be moving it back to the October, November timeframe that is more typical.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Are there questions for the city manager? Ms. Dillon?
Just have all the council members said they're available on these dates? Have we agreed to them?
I put them on my calendar.
Okay, I just wasn't sure whether you'd gotten a consensus that everybody was available.
Is anyone not available? I'll assume that's consensus that folks are available to attend.
Thank you very much.
Additional questions? Mr. Gearba?
The only thing I would ask for a friendly amendment is to include the dollar amount in the motion.
Well, if the members will indulge me, we will do this a bit more informally. Can the clerk articulate to me the dollar amount?
$88.90, I believe it is.
Correct.
So it would be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 12, 2018 memo from City Manager Campbell and to approve of the strategic planning proposal from Dr. Lou Bender in an amount of $8,890. Mr. Seal, do you accept that?
I accept that. Your
Ms.
Honor.
DeHar, do you accept that?
Yes.
Okay, then the motion will be modified without objection. Is there anything further? Then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Seal, seconded by Tahar. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-140, amendment to the Huntington Woods Sidewalk Installation Agreement. This will be a motion to approve or not to approve the amendment to the Huntington Woods Sidewalk Installation Agreement as submitted.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Seal. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. If you don't mind, I'll take the lead on this. Okay. So just for a little bit of background, and Mr. Shipman, the property owner, is present in the audience this evening. He and I negotiated probably for the better part of 2 or 3 months on the specifics contained within this agreement. Once we reached what we believe to be a mutually beneficial when we reached a mutually beneficial agreement, I handed this off to the city manager. I believe Nick Curcio was the one who drafted the agreement. Then it was shared with Mr. Shipman and his attorney, who subsequently signed off on this. Additional background, a connecting sidewalk between Huntington Woods, I believe was first proposed and discussed in the early 2000s. Is that correct, Mr. Shipman? Probably around 2002. Completion of this sidewalk was a condition of Phase 2 final site plan approval in Huntington Woods. Needless to say, as Huntington Woods is built out, there are a number of community residents who should and will use this sidewalk. Additionally, it's something that's been discussed for the better part of a decade, and I think it's important to finally deliver and to finally accomplish something tangible on this particular front. So, very much in favor of the motion. I guess at this time I would relinquish the floor to Mr. Shipman. Do you have any comments you would like to make, sir? Not required, but if you'd like to make a statement, you're more than welcome to do so. And I'd ask Ms. Bennett to also join him at the podium because I know you're going to make a brief comment about funding.
So I'm hoping that we can finally bring this sidewalk to fruition after a dramatic cost increase. Started with an engineering estimate of $22,000. The final bid is $106,000. With the passage of this motion, the city will obligate themselves to $40,000. Huntington Woods will invest $65,000, which is currently deposited with the city. I wish to thank the city of Saline, Mayor Marl, for partnering with this project. And if you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Shipman. Before we get to questions, I'm going to let Ms. Bennett make a brief comment, and then we'll open it up for dialogue.
Yes, so as the mayor has presented this to us, we obviously, during the budget process, for this fiscal year, we'll have some general fund, hopefully we'll have some general fund dollars that we can allocate for this first year payment. And then in next year, we're going to do some research for some possible SEMCOG or some other dollars that we could also help offset with this. But this is a great cost for this sidewalk, and we appreciate Mr. Shipman's contribution.
Thank you. And just for the public's benefit, so the city will contribute, if this motion passes, the city will contribute $40,000. We need to make the first $20,000 payment no later than June 30th of 2019, and make the second payment no later than June 30th, 2020. Okay? Questions, Mr. Gearbaugh?
So we're not anticipating this being installed until 2020 or 2021?
No, Mr. Shipman can clarify on that. We are looking to have this completed this construction season.
No, the agreement is that I'll fund that $40,000 and then city repays.
Okay, but the work will be done this current
The
fiscal
work will
year.
be done as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Mr. Seal?
I just want to thank Mr. Shipman publicly for his very generous offer in allowing the city to make the payments that we were going to contribute in subsequent years and not immediately. It's a very generous thing for you to do, sir. Thank you very much for putting your money forth.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Ms. Dillon?
Just to clarify, so is this now in process, so we're locked in with the 106
No.
price? Or
No, we are not. That was, believe it or not, the low bid. Yeah, the bids just for your information. The bids were 106,600, the low bid, 121,000, and 193,000, after starting at 22,000.
So I guess the second part of my question, or what I was trying to get at, is should the cost exceed the 106? Are you taking on that responsibility, anything above, or is the city going to be obligated to?
No.
to
You're
keep-
only obligated for the 40.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anything further? Any subsequent discussion? Mr. Shipman, thank you. Ms. Bennett, thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
We'll proceed to vote then. It's been properly moved by CO, seconded by Tahar to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-141. This is purchase of dump truck chassis. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 11, 2018 memo from DPW Director Fordyce and to approve or not to approve the purchase of a Freightliner tandem axle chassis from Wolverine under the Rochester Hills Purchasing Cooperative in the amount of $104,955.
Move to acknowledge and approve.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Is there a second?
Second.
You two are on fire tonight. Seconded by Councilmember CO. Mr. Fordyce, the floor is yours.
Thank you. We budgeted $220,000 for this fiscal year for purchase of a new plow truck. We have opted this year to go with a tandem axle chassis. All of our current plow trucks are single axle, which are somewhat more maneuverable but have smaller payload capacity. This truck will allow us to carry more salt, more liquid, and travel longer routes before having to come back to the DPW to refill with salt and liquids. The first motion is just for the chassis, which we are utilizing the Rochester Hills Purchasing Cooperative for that. We use that same cooperative in purchasing our 2016 plow truck. And it's similar to the My Deal program, but in this particular case, we found that Rochester Hills had better pricing than the My Deal contract.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Fordyce. Questions for our DPW Director, Mr. Gearbaugh.
Considering that this is probably a lot more heavier vehicle and then all the other stuff, how does this compare to our other ones in terms of additional weightage, tonnage?
Its payload capacity in terms of how many pounds of material it can carry is almost double. The volume ends up being less than double because of the way we have it configured. In terms of its loading on the street, it's the same because it has the additional axle. So the loading per axle is the same.
So the way it's more distributed won't damage the roads?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Ms. Tahar?
Yes, well, a comment and a question. First of all, as always, I always appreciate it when staff find the best deal and save us a little bit of money. So as I've said before, to you and others under the same circumstances, well done. And then I also appreciate the detail and the explanation of the process. It was just helpful to understand how this all, on a theoretical level, how this all works. And the question is, one of the items on the chassis is a software subscription. It's just a curiosity question. What does the software do for us?
Vehicles have become very complicated. There are a lot of electronics, and particularly the emissions controls on diesel engines are very complicated now. So in order for us to diagnose and work on many of the chassis and emissions control issues, we need this software subscription. It's kind of the only way. This particular subscription will work on our other two Freightliner chassis, so it has some pretty good value to it.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Ms. Dillon?
Just for clarification, so is this another of the big orange trucks?
Yes,
Okay, so this is the big trucks, okay,
bigger than the current big orange trucks.
okay. And not that I'm complaining, but why is it half the price that you had anticipated?
So there's two motions here, chassis and then the equipment. So together, it's $216,365.
Okay, there we go,
Yeah.
okay, because I was like, gotcha. Thank you.
Additional questions? Mr. Gearba?
Which raises the questions, but this motion is only for the,
Because this is
Chassis.
only
Chassis.
showing that it's only for
The chassis.
$111,000.
Yeah.
we
Well,
know
the
that
first
we're all buying.
motion's about 105, 104, 955. That's the chassis. And then all the equipment we
Okay.
put on the chassis and
Subsequent.
the installation of it in the next motion is 111, 410.
Very good.
Okay.
Anything further? Any discussion on the motion? It's been properly moved by Tahar then, seconded by Seal to acknowledge and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-142. This is dump truck outfitting. This is upfitting, excuse me. This is a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 11, 2018 memo from DPW Director Fortes and to approve or not to approve the purchase of a dump body, plow, assault spreader, pre-wet system, and other accessories and installation of equipment from truck and trailer under the Rochester Hills Purchasing Cooperative in the amount of $111,410.
Move to acknowledge and approve.
Moved by CO, seconded by Mr. Gearba. You already touched on this, Mr. Fortes, but do you care to make any additional comments?
So, same purchasing cooperative, same situation where this cooperative offered a better deal than the state of Michigan contract. We are equipping this truck with a front plow hoist, but we're not buying an additional front plow. We already have two, that's plenty. It'll have the underbody scraper like all of ours do, and then it'll have the side wing, the extendable side wing plow like our 2016 does. And that allows us to clear a wider path in one pass. So instead of 11 or 12 feet wide, we're now clearing 15, 16 feet wide. That has gone pretty well with the first truck. It takes a little bit of getting used to. As a driver, you have a lot of equipment out there and need to pay attention and get used to all that equipment. But it's gone well, so we're getting another one. We are equipping this one with a salt pre-wet system. Wetting the salt with a brine solution makes it work faster. And then if you modify the salt solutions, you can make salt work at lower temperatures. In the past, we've done batch treatments where we just mix it up in a pile in our salt barn. It's very labor intensive and it doesn't work quite as well. Having this onboard liquid equipment is a much faster, easier, less labor way, and it's more effective. I think, yeah, those are the highlights of what we're doing
Okay.
with this truck.
Additional questions, Ms. Dillon?
So, well, thank you for clarifying, and I apologize before. It's listed as dump truck, so I just was in my head thinking it was a different vehicle that you were outfitting.
Yeah.
So can this truck be used on all of our streets, or is it too big for any of our streets?
We probably would route this one away from like the smaller cul-de-sacs on off of Crestwood. But we can use this on all of our major streets and the vast majority of our local streets, such as Wildwood, Northview, Wood Hill. All of those are wide enough to use this size truck on. So.
And so is this for our current needs? Are we buying this? Like, do we actually need this now, or is it sort of future planning for all of our build-outs?
It's a little bit of both. Our oldest trucks are from the 80s, early 80s, so they're getting a little long in the tooth. Going with the tandem and the larger truck body, that is kind of anticipating the future a little bit as the city limits are prepared to grow. We're going to have longer routes and presumably no more people to run those routes. So being able to stay out there longer will keep us efficient.
And are we retiring anything from the current fleet?
That we haven't finished evaluating yet. So the old trucks are old, but they're still working. So one of those we have converted to our chip truck, and we're getting rid of the old trip truck. We haven't spent the time yet to look at what would be our fifth plow truck and decide whether that remains a plow truck, as a general use dump truck, because we also use these during leaf collection and general road maintenance, water main breaks, things like that. So they all have multiple uses. They call it a plow truck, but it gets used year-round. So haven't figured that out yet is basically the short answer.
Thank you very much.
Additional questions? Mr. Gearba?
interesting, it says this has a video system, a camera system on it?
Yeah, it's basically just a backup camera. So we can
I was
see
just
what's
wondering
going
if we could watch the front, so if we take out any
No, no, it doesn't have that.
Got it. Thank you.
Additional questions or discussion? Then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Seal, seconded by Gearba to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Fordyce. We move on to new business item 18-143. This is Fairdean rezoning amendment. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 12, 2018 memo from the Saline Planning Commission and to approve or not to approve the proposed ordinance 804, a zoning amendment to change the zoning at 217 West Henry Street from R2, two-family residential, to R3A, low-density multifamily residential, for a 0.19 acre portion of parcel number 18-18-01-170-014.
I'll move to acknowledge receipt of the memo because there was some clarification that needed to be done by legal advice.
Yep, okay, is there a second to that?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Dillon. Mr. Rubel, do you care to comment and specifically address what Mr. Gearba just referenced, which was the original motion that was enumerated at Planning Commission, we removed point 1 and 2, and I know you had talked to Nick Curcio that following Thursday.
Thank you. Yes, the questions that came up regarding the conditions, Mayor suggested removal of number 1 and Mr. Gearba number 2, and we were agreeable to that with the caveat that we also follow up with the attorney, get his opinion on that, which I did via email. And he said, yes, it would be okay to remove those 2 conditions because one, the question he had was on the buildability of that 0.19 acres. And the fact is, since it's bound by other lots and not accessible to frontage, it's not a buildable lot when it's separated. So that takes care of number 1. And then number 2 actually is probably already covered in the purchase agreement, and I found out from Mr. Farrell that it's also one of the provisions in the closing documents and the sale and purchase of the church parcel, the 0.19 acres. They actually won't transfer ownership until closing. So, and their closing really cannot occur, I believe, until the site plan is actually approved. So at that point, it would be a moot point. So that's information we received to confirm that.
Very good. Questions for Mr. Rubel?
And the question on it actually is, adding this piece of property to the existing piece of property, does it expand the amount of land in which you can build additional units?
Well, the 0.19 acres in itself basically doesn't really create probably more than one because it takes on the R3A, the density is determined by the number of units and not necessarily the size of the lot. And therefore, it's a formula based on the number of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units. In this case, as Mr. Farrell mentioned in the last presentation, I believe that was at council, that he has taken it from 2 and 3 bedrooms down to a lot of 1-bedrooms. And I don't know if there's any 2 bedrooms and a few 2-bedroom units. And so what happens there is the building gets smaller unit-wise, but then it can get larger to almost its original size of the 30 units. So that analysis can only be completed in total once we get the final site plan and all the dimensions and all the metrics on it, you know, the data. And then our planner at Carlisle Wortman, he will then review it in total and completely because of the site elements that need to be subtracted from the usable, buildable area. And so then you will have a real number to deal with on the final site plan. As I mentioned in the memo, the range he's in for an R3A is 9 to 12, and the 10.6 falls in that range. But at this point, it's only concept and theoretical. It's not defined until we see a site plan and actually that site plan can confirm and validate that you can actually put 44 units on it.
So what would be the benefit of us rezoning this at this point and not having had that assessment done already?
Well, I believe it's because he's purchasing it from the church to add to that parcel, and without it, he cannot actually use the concept plan that he's sending to you. So it's in your negotiations with Mr. Farrell whether or not, you want to consider that as an addition under this concept plan, and then once he owns it, and I believe it's a condition of the purchase that he get the rezoning as well as the site plan.
But there's nothing preventing us from asking for that.
No, no.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Ms. Dillon?
So the only thing on this parcel will be that barn, correct?
That's the way it's depicted on the concept plan, and that's what we're looking at tonight.
Okay. And I know I raised this question at planning, that I had asked if we would have an assurance that there would be no additional homes placed on that. And Mr. Farrell said he had no intention of putting homes on that, and I appreciate that answer on the spot. I guess what I don't understand is the barn a condition of the property? I mean, he's going to move this barn, he's gonna buy a piece of property to move a barn. I'm not sure I understand the whole concept of it. And whether these drawings are to scale as to where the barn is. And I'm just a little confused with this plot of land, with this barn on it. Is he creating any green space with it? Is it just, for additional parking? I guess I'm just
Yeah.
unsure.
Yeah, Mr. Farrell, I believe you addressed this 2 weeks ago in Ant Planning, but again, for the public record, can you talk about what your plans are for this additional 1.9 acres, assuming it's rezoned and you're able to purchase it?
0.19 acre.
Excuse me, 0.19 acres.
0.19.
0.19, boy.
0.19, sorry.
Verbal tick, my apologies.
It's really quite simple. I like the barn. I've been through it, I've measured the thing, I see no evidence of fire. Maybe there was fire before. It's in great shape. Some of the siding will be replaced. I mean, some of the siding and the openings, if you look at the sketches, that's the intention. But, it is a tiny little piece that gave me an opportunity to move the barn forward. And right now it's tucked, in that corner into the hillside. It's in deep shade. I would like to bring it forward and make it a signature of this development. I think it's unique. We are focusing in the change of design that we went through and the long exercises we went through, trying to figure out how to what this next phase of the project, or what the second option would look like. We do have a strong focus on one-bedroom units. These are 1,076, I think, square foot units. There are 17 of them. That's almost 50% of the number of units there. And we felt it was an opportunity to provide a community space. That is to scale. You don't go through this exercise on such an awkward piece of land as this without dealing with the inches that go. So while it may be presented as a concept plan, it's to scale. That barn is about 20 feet by 22 feet is its actual dimension. So it's not very big. It's less than 400 square feet. That is to scale. That's where we would like to put it. It's not my intention to use that parcel for anything else other than the barn and surround it with part of our retention design. And in our original retention design, the larger parcel down in the southwest corner, that was always intended, and we continue to intend to use that and treat it as not as a mown area, but as a seeded, naturalized area for retention. And we would do the same with this. Being able to split the retention has meant that that larger retention area can be more shallow. That's what it came down to. We can accommodate the retention right where we have it, but I like the fact that it can be more shallow. That to me is visually more appealing than a larger cut. So I have nothing else, I think it's a great amenity, and it's an opportunity to save a little building. It really is in great shape. If anyone wants to go in it, be more than happy to open up the doors and let you walk through it. The framing's in great shape. The building is square. The people that we have talked to about moving it, who are professional building movers, see no problem with it at all. I don't remember their name right now. I know they're out of Milan. That's my story.
No, that's fine. While you're at the podium, I do have a question. On the following page, it shows a building going through the middle of your property.
Sorry, can I approach so you can show me?
Absolutely.
What you're referring
To this building?
That building is on a neighboring property. When the survey was done for the purpose of the purchase agreement, the legal description showed that that building was actually encroaching on the church property by about 3 feet. So as part of that process of applying for the rezoning, there's a legal description existing, then there's a revised legal description of the parcel, which includes, and I don't know if that's in your package, it includes a little cut around on a revised survey that would go forward if this is approved. And then there is a third description, which would be the description of the whole parcel together. Does that make? So right now it encroaches.
Right. So is it
So
going to be
the revised
removed?
legal description it actually bumps around it a few feet,
Okay,
so as to remove that encroachment.
okay.
And so the neighbor would benefit from having, as now they encroach on the property, they would benefit by getting a little bit of land around that barn, around their building, which is a secondary building, an accessory building. To the best of my understanding, I haven't examined it. But they would actually come away out of this deal with a little land around it.
But if that's going to be retention area, is that going to be feasible?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, the retention takes that into account. The retention design takes it into account.
Enough space.
So it leaves their land alone. That's not, we would then, that then gets deeded to that parcel if this moves forward.
Okay.
I no longer would have, if we acquire the land, this is approved, I no longer have any access to that little area around it. That belongs to that owner, to that
Okay.
neighboring owner.
My next question, and I'm not sure who it would be for, is who owns this jog of land in between where your homes are and where the new property would be?
So there is also in the package, there is a proposed legal description which incorporates both parcels under one description. So the condominium association would own that piece and the rest of it. Would all be under a single ownership, single zoning.
So the current property, the 207 property plus the new piece is what you're saying. But then who owns this jog, this empty land? Is this part of your property?
Yes.
That is,
It
it's
is.
just
So
undeveloped
it's
land?
It's left because I wanted to define, for graphic purposes, the extent of this parcel in relation to the rest of the parcel. And what's actually in there, there's actually a beautiful crab tree. It's in great shape. It's probably 20, 25 feet high. It blooms beautifully. We're deliberately leaving that area to save a couple of trees that are there. But that boundary would then go away. That eastern boundary and the southern boundary of the church piece would go away, and the northern boundary would be an extension.
Can you show me on my drawing what you're referring to? I'm sorry. So where exactly would your new property line be? Oh, here you can, okay. Okay. That's okay. Okay, I see what, yep, I get the idea. Okay, so you're taking all of this. I'm sorry, it looked to me that you were just purchasing this square, was my concern, not a whole.
So we have already.
You already have all of this land, and so you're just adding this piece to it to finish off the square off the corner.
Correct.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. Ms. Mitchell?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Farrell, can you clarify, I'm going to go back to my drawings. I have a lot of tabs open. So this parcel of land in question, you're saying you're wanting to move the barn? But then did I hear you correctly, you were also intending to use it for water retention?
Yes.
Okay. I am having trouble seeing on that bird's eye view drawing that you submitted. I guess I'm not seeing where you're intending the retention to be. I see the barn.
Do you want to approach the dais, Mr. Farrell, and maybe show Councilwoman Mitchell on that? I don't know that he brought his PowerPoint, or it's not, certainly not hooked up.
The retention area would surround like that concept.
Okay. So, thank you, sir. So I guess you're not using the land just for the barn. You're using it also for water retention.
That's right. Yep.
Okay. And can you, or I don't know who this question is for, Your Honor. When we're talking about open space and required open space for a build like this, is this parcel in question that we're discussing tonight, is that considered open space towards that requirement?
The, any grassy area of that, of the whole parcel, any grassy or landscaped area would be probably considered open space. There's a large space to, the eastern end towards Marquana Court, which is a quite large area, and then all around the perimeter, much of the front, and then all around the .19 acre parcel with the small barn on it. So all of that would be considered or would be used in the open space computations. And however, those computations would be on the site plan that goes to the Planning Commission. So I'm not sure if Mr. Farrell has numbers put together yet.
It's about 30%. Sorry, I don't recall the exact calculation that Midwestern has done.
Of course. So, and just for clarification, so I know how to look at this piece of land in the context of the drawing. So this line here, is that, this line here, is that the boundary? Okay, and this is considered open space, and here and here?
Yes.
Okay,
So this boundary would now continue to that corner, down and then down to the road. At the moment, it turns here and goes there. There's a slight jog, and then it continues to the road.
I see. So, Mr. Rubel, what is the precedent, or what are the rules about open space? Is that affected by this rezoning? So for example, does open space have to be contiguous, or there's a limit to how narrow it can be? I'm trying to understand how this piece fits into that overall picture.
Right, the amount of open space is the minimum and the required are set by ordinance. For R3A, it's 40%. And what you would add in is all of the lawn and landscape areas. Essentially, those are areas that are not occupied by buildings or paving. And the barn, of course, too. So if you took the area of the whole parcel, which is now over 4 acres, and then you subtracted the area of the pavement and the buildings, that would probably give you the open space.
Okay, and that's the precedent we followed with, say, Maple Oaks?
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, I'm just gonna see if I have other questions.
Why don't you look for a moment, Ms. Mitchell, and I'll
That
open up
sounds
and see if there's
fine.
additional questions.
Thank you,
Additional
Your
questions
Honor.
regarding the motion to acknowledge receipt. Let's start with Ms. Tahar and then go to Ms. Dillon.
So if someone could, perhaps Mr. Rubel or one of our members of the Planning Commission could clarify the steps of the process. If this rezoning of this tiny piece were approved tonight to match the zoning of the rest of the property that we've already done, my understanding is that does not take effect until the entire, actually go into effect until the entire planning process has been completed? or site plan approval has occurred, or where does it fit
Yes.
in the process?
So, and I'm glad that you asked that question, because I think it will benefit, I think there's a benefit in articulating it so that the public is aware of what the process is. So, let's say that the motion that is currently being considered, 18-143, is approved, the rezoning is approved, and the subsequent motion to sign off on the redesign. And what we're looking at in the redesign, per the clause in the sales agreement, is some architectural features and the overall look and feel of the development. It then, because this deviates significantly from the first iteration, I say that respectfully, of course, it does have to go back to the Planning Commission for preliminary and then final site plan approval. So many of these issues involving parking, traffic management, building features, stormwater management, that will have to be discussed and vetted and debated by the Planning Commission. So there are multiple steps subsequent to this. And so, again, I articulate that for the public's benefit. And if there are folks in and around the Monroe Street area who are interested in this development, I would encourage you to contact Assistant Clerk Ritchie, and we can get your email address and contact information. Then we can notify you via email if and when the Fairdean development appears as an action item on a Planning Commission agenda. Is that helpful?
Yes, it is. And if I could,
Please.
and if we approve the rezoning of this tiny piece tonight, when does that go in effect in the sequence of the process you just described?
Mr. Rubel can probably provide a better answer than I can on that.
Well, that could go into effect, and I believe there's just a period of time that has to be advertised or posted in the newspaper as an effective date. That's usually the way some of the ordinances work. I'm not sure if it works for the zoning that way. Okay, Terry says yes.
Clerk
So
confirmed.
that would go into effect when it is, of course, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and then is noticed for an effective date. And then at that point, that frees up Mr. Farrell then to complete his site plan and submit it to the Planning Commission as a whole project, combined lot.
Okay, thank you.
Additional.
Excuse me, I mean, otherwise it would be difficult to do a site plan review basically on a parcel that has, one has R3A zoning, one is R2, then you'd have to add conditions to cover that scenario.
Right. Additional questions, Ms. Dillon?
I do. Following up on Mr. Hart's, so this, after tonight, this will not come back to council again?
The rezoning?
The issue as a whole? The final site plan would come back?
No,
So
it would not.
So we would not see this property again after tonight?
Correct.
Okay, just clarifying that.
Correct.
And then my next question is, if for some reason this property were to revert back to the city, what would happen with this piece of property? If the 207 came back, what happens to this piece of property? Because it's separately owned, correct? It is not going to be added to.
It will be added if this process is successful. So if I could.
Please, absolutely. If you want to use the microphone.
The process is really the same process that we went through in the acquisition of the original parcel from the city, in that we closed on that. Part of the purchase agreement, the way it set it up, was that we closed subject to obtaining site plan approval. And that's what we did. So we went through the site plan approval. The city gave us permission to apply for site plan approval for that project. We obtained that and we closed. It's the same situation with this parcel. We have the same outline agreement with the church, that they are giving us permission to go forward and apply for rezoning. Should that be successful, that they would continue to give us permission to include this as part of an overall site plan to go through the city process. If that is successful, then we close that land within a month.
Okay,
So it would then all be under one ownership, one legal description.
that's what my question is. It would be added to it would be added to the current legal description.
Correct.
So should the property come back, that piece would come back with it?
Yes.
Okay. And without this piece of property, is there sufficient land for retention, water retention?
Yes, there is.
So it would be
As
allocated
I
to an-
mentioned, it gave me the opportunity to make the larger, the southwestern corner, a more shallow retention area.
Southwestern, okay, so this, the lower piece, okay.
There are additional questions. We're deviating a little bit from the motion that's on the floor, which is to acknowledge receipt of the memo. Mr. Gearbaugh?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted to clarify, because part of the discussion is truly the zoning, and which is what we've been asking about. So the issue is, once this is zoned, it's zoned. So how this property is then used in the future is contingent upon this zoning. So even though Mr. Rubel has stated that it can't be buildable, if the church was to grant them a right-of-way to a drive to that property, and they wanted to build an apartment building on it, they could do that, correct, Mr. Rubel? At this point in the discussion.
Well, if the church wanted to build on that property, for one, if they built something or anything, it has very small connection to the main parcel, very, very narrow. I think it's shown on the drawing.
About 12 feet.
About 12 feet. Plus, by the time you apply the yard setbacks to a small enclosed lot, you have a very little or very small buildable space. The only thing the church had hoped for, and in all the years I've been here, to expand was to actually, if they had enough membership, they would put a small parking lot there. That's the only time they've indicated any type of improvement on that .19 acres, but apparently they have just given up on that kind of improvement.
But you indicated that because there is no frontage on that property, it could never be built on it?
As a separate lot. It can only be built on or something on it. Maybe the church, if they kept it and it was still their parcel, they might build a shed on it, a little storage building. That's about it.
Clarified on that.
Mr. Gerber, can I add something to that? So part of the purchase agreement with the church is based on the design that you see. So
Right,
if
the
that
issue-
helps.
The issue, though, for us is, once we approve a zoning, it goes with the land.
Yes, I
It doesn't-
understand,
It's not a
yes.
special use of that land. So once that's declared, it's in that situation, and so we need to be careful as to how that potential land could be used in the future. Just like we granted this property in R3 ruling, because we were thinking there was only going to be 30 units. So combining this together, I can see why that would help make this property more beneficial, but it did raise the question, and Ms. Dillon had mentioned it, is what happens with that piece of property should this project not go forward? And even though we get it so far and it stops and reverts back to the city, there's a piece of property in the middle that, somehow it's going to have to be negotiated as to what would happen with that property, whether the city compensates for it or whatever, because we sold the property for a certain dollar amount, which included only so much property. So that whole
I think it comes
negotiation,
back.
everything would add to
Yeah.
concerns.
Again, I think it becomes one parcel, so it would come back in its totality. That would be its legal description, would be one parcel.
Correct.
Yeah.
I could see a lawyer argue that that's not necessarily the case.
Ms. Mitchell?
Thank you, Your Honor. So going along this vein, just hypothetically, if the property ends up for whatever reason not being developed and then it's considered coming back to the city, is that clear in our language, our contract language, that
It comes back
it comes back, this parcel along with it?
very well.
Well, certainly not this new parcel that's being requested to be rezoned, but the overall parcel that the city sold to High Meadows Development LLC has the opportunity to come back at the same amount of purchase price that Highland Meadows Development purchased it for.
So let me just rephrase a little bit. is the contract language we have, so in this scenario, this land is purchased and owned by this development company. For whatever reason, the development doesn't come through. Is the contract language that we have clear that in addition to what we sold, this piece also becomes part of it?
Well, I get, that would be, as far as, is it clear? I mean, it's specific to this, the parcel that was purchased. That would, I think, at least I thought I heard, what I heard Mr. Gearbach to say is that it would need to be most likely negotiated because there is that additional parcel that would be attached. So as far as a potentially additional cost.
The biggest, if I may.
Please.
The biggest concern is if we rezone this piece of property, what happens with it? Should it not? There's no guarantee that it's going to come back with this bigger piece of property. It will be rezoned R3. Then the issue is, can somebody build on it? Potentially, and Mr. Rubel has just said that it's not a buildable lot, but I'd have to clarify that from that perspective. So we'd have a chunk of property that's zoned R3 that either goes with or does not go with the city previously owned property.
Okay, so that helps answer my concerns. So I am less experienced with this type of land sale. This is my first term of council. So is that property ever rezoned again? Like we have reassigned a zoning and it can be applied to change again? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Anybody's free to, free to
Okay.
apply.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Additional questions on the motion? It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Is there now a motion to approve or not to approve?
Move to approve.
Moved by Tahar to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Seo. Discussion. Mr. Gearboss?
The only reason that I would support this, and I mentioned it at planning, was because it does make the bigger piece of property more developable, and in that perspective, a better potential development could happen on it. Where I am concerned is that should there something happen, that we have a square sitting in the middle that potentially someone's going to own that's not buildable, and either would have to end up being bought by whomever would acquire this bigger piece of property, or someone would buy it from the other house, or it's going to sit there as a landlocked piece of land.
Let's do this, Mr. Gearboss, because I actually see merit to your concern. But I would also acknowledge what Mr. Rubel said, that, it's not really a buildable site on its own. Unless there's objection from the dais, perhaps Mr. Campbell can get clarification from Mr. Curcio on that. I'm about 99% sure that Mr. Farrell's assessment is correct, that once this parcel is rezoned, it becomes part of the larger parcel. And if for whatever reason this development were to fail, it would all come back to the city. But again, unless there's objection from the dais, I see no harm in asking Mr. Curcio that question. So we'll do that without objection. Additional discussion. Ms. Dillon.
So just to clarify then, could the church property then be rezoned? If that were to be rezoned to an R3, would that be a big enough lot at that point to build?
If it's rezoned,
To rehome those two pieces back together?
if you, okay, let's say the rezoning's approved, Mr. Farrell obtains site plan approval. At that point, then, they close on the property and the .1 acres merges with the 3.9 acres. They are then one lot. There are no longer two lots, and therefore there is nothing to really split off and go back to the church. That lot line that he showed you on your plan there, the easterly line, the southerly line, that line completely disappears, no longer valid, because the land description change has been recorded with the Washtenaw County Register of Deeds Office.
Right.
So that line, invisible lot line, completely disappears. So there is no longer a parcel to split off of the combined parcel, because the perimeter is now the defined legal boundary line. So there is no separate parcel to split off.
Thank you.
Anything further, Ms. Mitchell?
Yeah, I guess I'm so sorry. I'm still confused because according to Mr. Rubel, it turns into one whole parcel.
Right.
But then I'm hearing a question about our contract language. Like, is that clear and does it have to be renegotiated? So I guess I don't feel a lot of confidence at this point. There's some outstanding questions for me.
Well, I think it's, if I may, and not to be argumentative, but to my earlier point, Mr. Farrell's assessment, Mr. Rubel's assessment, and my assessment, and I'm 99.9% positive on this, again, it becomes one parcel subsequent to the rezoning. If for whatever reason this development was not completed, based on the timeline that's enumerated in the sales agreement, it reverts back to us. It reverts back to the city in its entirety. Mr. Gearbox.
That's the potential cloud that I want clarified.
Yep, and we will get, there was no objection from the dais,
But
so.
unfortunately, moving that forward and approving a zoning tonight does not correlate. I would have to have that cloud lifted before I would approve any kind of zoning moving forward.
Okay. That's certainly a fair perspective. Mr. Seal?
I thought that the city manager answered that question when he said that we'd probably have to renegotiate the price, because the original price was what was paid for the 3.9 acres, did not include this small church parcel. If it was now going to include the church parcel, we'd probably have to renegotiate the price with Mr. Farrell if we were to reassume ownership. That's my view of it.
Correct. That's exactly what I tried, that's what I meant to say if that were misleading, but that's exactly my opinion.
Additional comments from the dais? Should we proceed to vote then? It's been properly moved and seconded, moved by Tahar, seconded by CO to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
There were 3 in favor, 3 opposed, so this motion does not pass. However, it does not fail and will be reconsidered at a future meeting. So in the interim, this is what I'm hearing, is that the 3 who voted nay can correct me if I'm wrong, that you would like clarification from legal counsel prior to being comfortable voting in favor of this. Is that correct? Correct, Mr. Gearbaugh?
Yeah, I would like clarification, and from my perspective, if the property comes on board, then we don't need to negotiate anymore. I would rather just have an amendment done to our existing agreement to clarify that, and that would be sufficient for me to move forward on it.
Okay, Ms. Dillon?
Can you just reiterate, Mr. Yearbaugh, what you just asked for?
That if this property that's being considered is joined with the city's property, it will come back to the city should the entire property,
That's what he's looking for clarification on.
Okay.
but we will not renegotiate any more price or anything.
Yes, correct.
Okay. I'm assuming you can reach out to Mr. Curcio and probably get clarification for that, on that particular point within a day or so. Here's my perspective on this. There's obviously, because the rezoning was not approved this evening, there's no point in voting on the subsequent motion, which is to approve the redesign, because the redesign is contingent upon the rezoning being approved. So we will not be acting on the subsequent motion unless the city manager disagrees with that assessment.
I think that would be fine.
Okay. Here's what I would like, folks. The city manager will get clarification from legal counsel on that point. As soon as you do, if you would disseminate that, I'll get your question in just a minute. As soon as you get clarification on that, if you could disseminate something electronically to city council, that would be great. I'm just going to be very candid. I am very, very eager to move forward on this particular development. And again, I want to reiterate for the public record, the subsequent motion is council signing off on some of the architectural features and the concept. We don't have the right to usurp the authority of the Planning Commission, which will get into details involving parking, stormwater management, building features, the impact of traffic, etc. So it's my hope that once we get confirmation from legal counsel, assuming it mirrors the perspective of myself, Mr. Farrell, and Mr. Rubel, that we can move forward on the rezoning and approve the redesign at one of our upcoming meetings. Does that sound reasonable? What was your question, Mrs. Dillon?
My question is, why are we not voting on a redesign? If this parcel is just to hold a barn that is not actually a part of the project. Mr. Farrell has stated that there was adequate retention in other areas. So this parcel is theoretically not necessary to this development.
Perhaps Mr. Farrell and Mr. Rubel could clarify. Probably not.
It has nothing to do with the design of,
It's not essential, but the acquisition of this parcel allows you to relocate the barn, and then did it also allow you to do some reconfiguration of the buildings? Mr. Farrell? Do you mind commenting on that?
If this doesn't go through, the configuration of the buildings would remain just as they are on the diagrams that you have. The barn would obviously stay where it is, but we'd have to look at our pro forma as to whether that is worth keeping at that point or not, versus the units that are there.
Well, then
And our retention area would simply get deeper, and we would proceed with a project of this design to through the full site plan approval process.
Okay. Well,
without it.
you provide me with some direction and insight, Mr. Farrell. If you're, are you comfortable then with us entertaining a motion to approve the redesign? Since we did not formally act on, or we did not approve the rezoning? Or would you prefer for us to wait?
I don't think it's Mr. Farrell's decision.
I'm just asking his opinion. It's not Mr. Farrell's decision, but I have the right to ask him his opinion. Excuse me. Mr. Farrell.
I'm struggling to answer that, because what I don't understand is so I'm trying to play it through. If the rezoning is turned down, that means that either the barn stays where it is, or the barn comes away and the units that are currently in that location take the place of the barn. And I don't have that answer at my fingertips. So does that, if you were to approve the concept tonight, does that include the possibility that you may not include you may not approve the rezoning, and therefore the relocation of the barn? Because the sole objective of this extra piece of land is to move the barn.
Right.
And shallow, and as a result, we can make our retention area shallow.
Well, obviously, the chair will entertain any motion that's presented, that's appropriately worded and presented on the floor. It appears to me that if we get the consensus from legal counsel that we expect to get, I believe there's a majority who would favor rezoning. That's my hunch. But my personal opinion is, we would sort of get the cart before the horse, and that's why we listed the rezoning prior to the redesign. But again, the chair, if someone would like to make a motion to approve the redesign, the chair would entertain that.
I'll move to postpone until our next meeting.
Okay. Move to postpone until August, is that the 6th? Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Mr. Seo. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it, and the motion carries. Mr. Farrell, thank you for your attendance this evening and your patience. We'll be in touch. The chair moves on to new business item 18-145. This is resolution to relinquish farmland agreement for the Layer property. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 10th, 2018 memo from City Attorney Curcio, and to approve or not to approve the resolution to relinquish farmland and the agreement for Layer property.
I'll move to acknowledge receipt for discussion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Mitchell. We do have Mr. John Layer here, as well as Mr. Nick Donofrio from Grand Saqua Homes, and I believe Bruce Finkbeiner, who's representing Mr. Layer. If there are questions for these gentlemen, but I'll let Mr. Campbell begin. This is pretty cut and dry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, of the property that was recently annexed into the city from Pittsfield Charter Township for proposed residential redevelopment, currently 29 acres of the total 72 is under what's called a Public Act 116 agricultural abatement. And so in order, what they'd like to do, so with the 116 agreement in place restricts it for the property used for only agricultural uses. And so since they want to change the use from agricultural to residential, they need to relinquish this 116 agreement. And so with the request that you have in the packet, and there's also a resolution that before the council to consider, and this would simply be a recommendation to the state to terminate or relinquish the 116 designation.
Very good. Are there questions for Mr. Campbell? No questions? How about discussion on the motion? Then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Mitchell to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Is there a motion now to approve or not to approve? Move to approve by Gearboss. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by CO. Any discussion? Does the developer or property owner care to make any comment at this time? Gentlemen, we appreciate your attendance this evening. If there's no discussion on the motion, again, very innocuous, we'll proceed to vote. It's been moved by Gearboss, seconded by CO to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for being here. We move on to new business item 18-146, modification to charter amendment ballot language. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 12, 2018 memo from City Attorney Nick Curcio and to approve or not to approve the proposed resolution to amend the ballot language as requested by the Attorney General's office. And I would also note, and Councilwoman Mitchell can correct me if I'm wrong, there is one additional modification made to the draft that's in front of you this evening that came at her request.
I'll move to acknowledge receipt so we can understand exactly what that change involved.
Okay, move to acknowledge receipt by Gearboss. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dillon. Mr. Campbell, do you care to comment briefly?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So and there's of course the red line on I think it's the very last page of this particular document for this item. There was a redundancy. The reviewing attorney for the State Attorney General's office, as it says in Mr. Curcio's memo, that the first paragraph of the ballot question is redundant of the second and should therefore be removed. And so that's, as you can see, the first paragraph has been removed, and then subsequent to this being sent out for council review, Councilmember Mitchell had requested a better, well, I believe she mentioned prompt, but a better explanation to help folks understand what right-of-way is.
Good.
And so they came back with, City Attorney's Office came back with adding, as the one that's at the table at the dais today, where it says instead of for right-of-way repairs, it says for street and right-of-way repairs and improvements.
Very good. Okay, questions regarding either Ms. Mitchell's modification or the changes recommended by the Attorney General's office? Mr. Gearbaugh.
I'm just looking at this and it says, whereas the Michigan Attorney General's office, whatever, and it says, this proposal blank is redundant in second paragraph and should be removed. Is this the language we're actually, is there
So-
something on this that shouldn't be on here, is what I'm saying? Because it
So-
looks like there's a sentence here that just,
Are you looking at the most recent one that was provided
the
this
one that
evening?
was just put on our.
Yeah, so the only
wording
change.
under that.
Yeah, the only change, which was extremely minor, again, they had, the city attorney's office had subsequently, when they received the suggestion from the reviewing attorney, they made that change and submitted it. However, they believe that because it is such a small change to add for street and right-of-way, for that clarification, that it should not be an issue. So we could simply, we would change for the resolution, you would change where it says for right-of-way, you would say for streets.
I don't
I'm
think
sorry, for street and
That wasn't your
right-of-way.
question, though, was it?
I'm
It's not
sorry.
my
No,
question,
yeah,
no. There's
this
a paragraph
whereas on
in
the
here
first
that,
page, it will be removed. That's not going to be in the
there's something in here
No,
that doesn't
no,
look right.
the actual ballot language is simply down towards the bottom of page, so at the bottom of the,
It begins with shall, section 10.3, and ends with
Exactly.
improvements?
so where it says proposed
therefore
amendment to
be
the Saline Charter.
Okay, after now be it resolved that, and then it goes forward.
Correct, so the actual ballot language is simply,
That little section.
is that
I
section.
was just looking at this, though, it just kind of makes no sense, because it goes, the proposal, ... is redundant and whatever. This doesn't look like it's a full, I don't know, resolution. It looks like it's a draft with some language in here that you'd never include in the resolution. So this isn't the final resolution, is the way that I look at this.
This is the resolution the city attorney's office gave to us.
Well, then I would never do a resolution that has, this proposal is ... redundant of the second paragraph and should be removed.
He's looking at the page,
That's an editing suggestion.
right here, this whereas.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's,
right here.
Yeah. Ms. Mitchell,
Sir?
please.
I think what Mr. Gearbaugh is saying is that whereas, it's not the one right above the be it resolved, it's the one previous to that.
Yep.
I think that's draft language, and Mr. Gearbaugh properly picked out that should not be on our final paperwork. And my understanding, your suggestion would be to strike that paragraph from our final, because we wouldn't want that language in our final resolution that we send on.
yeah, I would want to see what our final resolution is without some apparent improper information in it.
So he's talking, you see which one he's.
I understand what he's, but again, from my understanding, from the, this has been prepared, yeah, I mean, I don't have a suggestion or an answer. I mean, this was prepared by the attorney, by our city attorney's office, and then the,
I'd
What-
recommend that our city attorney correct it.
Yep.
Mr. Har?
If I may?
Yep.
It totally makes sense.
Oh,
So if you, whereas the Michigan Attorney General's office suggested a change to our original wording, which starts out with what's quoted there, and whereas, now therefore, we are modifying the proposed language to eliminate the part that's referred to in the first, that whereas that Mr. Gearbaugh is having trouble with. But this, the resolution at the top is not showing up on the ballot or anywhere else,
Right.
right? This is a follow-up resolution to the one we did the last time when we established the language that the Attorney General said you should change this because it's redundant.
This
I
is what
see.
appears on the ballot.
Making a resolution to
Yeah.
remove a resolution
Correct.
language.
Correct. What you see at the bottom of page 1 is what will appear on the ballot.
No, I know that.
Yeah.
I'm just, when I look at this language, it's talking about removing something, and it just seems is redundant to the second paragraph and should be removed. It's like,
am I understanding, oh, man.
Please.
Am I understanding, Mr. Har, you're saying that this paragraph offers kind of a trail of breadcrumbs to, like, this is where we were, this is the process, we have to send it to the Michigan Attorneys General. They said we needed to make this change. Is that what you're saying? This
Yes,
is a
yes.
documentation of the process, is that
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
And if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
If you look at what came to us in our original packet, the language we originally proposed is the last sheet, and the part that is being struck is or is lined out, not red in our black and white copies, but is lined out, and that's exactly the part that's referred to in the whereas Mr. Gearbaugh's asking about.
I see. Is
So-
that clear, Mr. Gerba?
yeah, it is now. It's just something I've never seen done that way. It just kind of looks like it's half missing something.
Additional questions? Ms. Dillon?
Just for clarification, now that we've changed this, it says for street and right-of-way repairs. Is it right-of-ways relative to those streets, or are they separate things?
The word street has been suggested to be placed in there to help people understand street and right-of-way, they're the same, because that the rights-of-way and the streets, I'm trying to think how better to explain it, but it's simply clarifying language to help people understand what a right-of-way is a street.
Additional questions?
Okay. I almost feel like it's a little more confusing that they're two separate things.
Well, you can certainly
I'm just saying,
take it out.
Ms. Mitchell?
Right, so my concern, I appreciate that, Ms. Dillon, I completely understand your point. As a citizen, when I read the ballot, it's not language to have right-of-way repairs. We, as Insight, it's lingo. Right-of-way repairs is lingo to municipalities. But for the average citizen who is going to look at this in the voting booth, my thought process was, what's a right-of-way? And if we use the word streets, it might help clarify. That's just my thought. You know, if you have input, I'm ready to hear it. That was my intention.
I'm not sure what I would propose. Like I said, when I read it, it just sort of struck me as it almost sounds like they're two separate things. And I don't know if that's going to cause more confusion.
If I may, Mr.
Please.
Just for clarification too, our city attorney's office, Mr. Sweats, also clarified to me that this is not an opportunity to rewrite this language because the bulk of the language has been submitted to the Attorney General's office, and so
It's just going to take longer.
correct, in which we wouldn't have that wouldn't allow the time to be placed on the November ballot.
Mr. Hart.
Just to follow up on that, so adding street at this point also lengthens the process, or future possible changes?
Mr. Sweats felt that this very minor revision would be okay.
Okay,
Pretty innocuous, straightforward.
thank you.
So motion on the floor moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion to approve the draft that's before you or to not approve?
So move to approve it.
Thank you, Mr. Gearboss. Is there a second? Seconded by CO.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Discussion? No, proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Of course, when you hear something back from the AG's office and the governor, you'll be letting us know.
Absolutely.
Very good. So we can begin messaging to our residents about the impact that this proposal would have if it were to pass. We move on to the discussion portion of our agenda. First up is commission, committee, or task force reports. Ms. Mitchell.
The Historic District Commission met this past Wednesday at the same time as the planning meeting, and we are working on a resolution to send to council urging preservation of Oakwood Cemetery. And we are also going to hold our first meeting, our planning meeting, to start looking at expanding the Historic District Commission, or the Historic District within Saline, pardon me. We will have our first meeting discussing a timeline and making plans for that process.
Very good. Additional committee, commissioner, task force reports. Reports or other announcements. Then last but certainly not least, a wastewater treatment update with our new superintendent. Appreciate you being here and appreciate your patience this evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I wouldn't say you always save the best for last, but here I am. I'll be brief since we just met last week. A couple of items. The chemical scrubber has been, the motor has been repaired and put back in place for at the wastewater treatment plant. Blower motor has been ordered for the flare gas from the sludge digester, which is another source of odors, so we're hoping to get that in place within the next 2 weeks. A big item is this morning, Nutrigrow arrived and started hauling sludge from the site. Miss Royal sent out a notice on Friday to affected community members that this would be occurring. Should be occurring all week. We should get our inventory very low, down to just about empty by the end of the week, we're hoping. In the meantime, it'll probably be odorous with that process, but they don't go through the city. They do go south on Monroe Street to Macon, and then whatever it's called, yes. E&L Construction has brought their construction trailer on site for the odor abatement project, so there is a small sign of progress there. So hopefully things will get moving forth. I know Gary Rubel has been signing off on the required city permits for construction. And I guess the other item, Mr. Campbell has brought to me that some members of the community have concerns about an issue called PFAS, PFAS. I'm not an expert on the subject, but PFAS is an acronym for perfluoroalkyl substances, and it's been in the news a little bit lately. These substances have two main components that they're worried about, PFOA and PFOS. And what they are is they've been used to make carpets, and this is from an EPA fact sheet. They've been used to make carpets, clothing, fabrics for furniture, paper packaging for food, and other materials that are resistant to water, grease, or stains, kind of like Gore-Tex, that type of stuff. They're also used for firefighting at airfields and a number of industrial processes. They were phased out in 2002, one of the substances, and the other was phased out in 2006. But they are very persistent, and there are concerns in the environment about these substances. So as far as the city goes, I looked through our records, and the drinking water treatment was tested in 2013 by EPA order, not just for Saline, but as a general survey. And both results in April and October were non-detectable. And currently, the focus of the MDEQ is on the wastewater aspect, and is part of their industrial pretreatment program. And previous staff has identified 2 potential sources of PFAS in the wastewater. And we tested Liebherr in June, and the results were non-detectable. And we're testing Floresia tomorrow. And I'll file a report at the end of the month with the MDEQ.
Thank you. Will you keep us updated on that? And perhaps, I mentioned this to the city manager earlier today, perhaps at our next council meeting on August 6th, you could provide us some information, maybe some additional insight subsequent to some research as to whether you think another test similar to what was done in 2013 would be appropriate, and how onersome that would be to complete. Maybe if you could comment on that on the 6th. I don't want to put you on the spot tonight, but in 3 weeks' time, I think that'd be terrific.
Sure.
Okay. There are questions for our wastewater treatment director, Ms. Dillon?
I ask at every meeting, how are we doing with our Nova filters?
We have found that to return we have a failed motor on one of the units. We're going to return that to the local vendor for assessment of what the problem is and get it repaired. So we have one operating and one not operating.
Sticking to Nova filters, at our last meeting during the presentation, it was stated that there were 3 basic buckets of issues with the filters, and Nova felt that 2 of them had been taken care of. Is that your assessment also, and Mr. Campbell's assessment? Are we still working on one issue, or are we having across-the-board issues?
Well, I think Mr. Loy stated that he feels that the 2 issues in the production part, the design and the actual manufacturing, have been resolved. He's focused on the trunnion wheels, and I think he stated that we were one of the first places, if not the first place, to have the new design of the trunnion wheels, and until they get several thousand hours of service from those units, they won't know that whether they're reliable or they fail. Okay.
Are they doing inspections prior to failure, or are you doing, is there things you can be looking for to see that it's going to fail, or do you just have to wait till it stops working?
It depends on the part of the equipment. Certain things, like a motor failure, is a sudden failure. Probably on those wheels, you're going to see some wear prior to a complete failure. What's normal wear and what's abnormal, I'm not familiar enough with these units to know. It sounds like they've had a problem with these wheels at several different sites, but we have inspected them. I know Nova was just there in the last couple weeks to look at the wheels, and they felt that they were looking fine at that time, but some things just wear naturally and they need to be replaced. I'm not sure what the expected hours runtime for the wheels is, to be honest with you, but it wouldn't be abnormal to replace equipment before it fails, just on a normal schedule.
And then you just mentioned that there is a motor that's down, that's got about 2 weeks out to have it replaced. How long has that motor been down?
Prior to my being here, so I'm not sure.
So, Mr. Campbell, how long does it take to get one of these motors?
Well, so this particular motor, and Steve, you can jump in too, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, so early on, I believe in the first year, or in the first 6 months that these filters were online, the area that they're located, there was an overflow, and that motor became submerged, and so it's worked up until recent. And so the question is, what caused the failure? Was the submersion by the overflow, the water, or was it something else? And so when we send it to this motor manufacturer, they'll go through and they'll determine what the cause was. And so I know Nova is suspecting that expecting them to say that it's going to, it's because it was submerged, but we'll wait and see. And if the submersion was not the cause, then they would cover that under their warranty that they've continued to cover. But if it is the submersion, then that is an item that would not be covered under the warranty. So that's hopefully going to be turned around in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I've been waiting to find who the proper vendor to send it back to, because there may be a disagreement about the cause of the failure, and then whether it's covered by warranty or whether we are responsible for it. So I want to make sure that it's sent to the proper company to inspect and assess it and repair that.
Additional questions? Are you done, Ms. Dillon?
Well, my other question was, I appreciate that the clerk has sent out notices to the people in the affected areas. The smell is far-reaching. I think we should be pushing out notifications on social media. The odor over the weekend was just horrific on the west side by the cemetery. Absolutely horrific. And that was before sludge hauling, so that makes me concerned. Thank you.
Ms. Mitchell?
Thank you. I just wanted to double check in Ms. Dillon's line of questioning. The question was asked, and I found my notes from when Mr. Loy was here. You know, he described those three different aspects of problems: design, quality control, and then this wheel issue is a vendor item. Does his description of those different aspects, those three aspects, is that what city staff think? Do they believe that the two of the three issues have been resolved and we're down to just the wheel? Or now we have this motor question, so we're back to looking at, either design or quality control or something on our side?
Of course, I haven't been here to experience the history of the equipment failure, but, as a consumer, you don't know whether it's a design problem, a materials problem, or what the problem is. You just know that you're having a difficulty with whatever piece of equipment you bought that's not working. And quite frankly, if you're under warranty, it's up to the supplier to take care of that. So it's difficult for an operator or user to assess wherein the problem is. But as far as design things, Mr. Lloyd did talk about changing certain design features, and it's hard for us to assess as operators, and especially without me being here I've only been here 3 weeks.
And respectfully, I would think that, root cause analysis, problem solving, my expectation would be that is a question that's able to be answered. I don't know if Mr. Campbell has, having been here longer, when Mr. Loy said, we've got 2/3 of the problem solved, we've fixed the design, we fixed the quality control, now it's just the wheel. Does that coincide with your opinion?
Well, so respectfully, I fall in line with Steve with his comments in that, because we're not involved in we haven't seen the redesign, we haven't been part of the discussions that Nova's had with their manufacturers. So, if and I think you had, Ms. Mitchell, you had mentioned, had asked me a question about, I think it was, and I apologize if it wasn't, I think it was you, but any case, the question was asked of me, did I think, we were getting close, or that, and I said, time will tell. And that's exactly, I mean, time will tell. And Steve mentioned earlier about having, with these new wheels, these new trunnion wheels, having many hours of being in use to determine if in fact they have solved that final stage. And so I guess my answer would be potentially if it does fail in a short amount of time, or at least what their expectations are, then the design and the manufacturer may or may not be where they think it is, if that makes sense.
And in addition to that, I think you would be able to tell those type of issues looking over the units as a whole throughout the country. If you're seeing that issue on several units as opposed to just a single application, if there's a design and build problem, you would see that experienced
I see.
at multiple sites. So
That's a helpful,
like a class action type.
yeah, that's
Item.
a helpful answer. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Steve.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank
your time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to remind everybody that council petitions are due by 5 p.m. on August 7th.
We come to the second public comment period under the Open Meetings Act. Any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record.
Mary Hess. I was wondering, since there was a lot of discussion on this wonderful barn, if in fact Mr. Feldine could do literally how much his barn would fit into this lot. There's drawings here where it has parking places and greenery, and I would request that there actually be a drawing by Mr. Feldine on the width and how many feet the width of the barn is, and have it put on the lot that is proposed for the different zoning. Is that possible?
Mrs. Hess, you know we don't engage in a back and forth during the public comment period.
Oh, for me, right.
For every citizen. Are there additional citizen comments? Please.
Dear Mayor Marl and City Council members, thank you for allowing me to speak. I am Lola Killey of Ann Arbor. I want to make you aware of a bill that has passed the Michigan State Senate and is being considered in the House Energy Policy Committee. SB 0637 is the Small Wireless Communications Facilities Deployment Act. It was created to remove barriers to small cell equipment deployment, but it does so at the expense of local governments and its citizens. I'm here to ask you to oppose SB 0637 for the following reasons. The bill takes away the local government's control over its rights-of-way. It allows unlimited proliferation of equipment support poles. It prohibits revenue sharing by the local communities with the wireless carriers. It prohibits the local governments from requiring public services from the wireless carriers. It puts a substantial financial risk on the local communities when the rights-of-way are damaged or the equipment is abandoned. It allows equipment the size of a small refrigerator to be mounted 40 to 60 feet from the ground. It allows equipment the size of a standard refrigerator to be installed in the ground to support the equipment on the poles. It provides an essentially free infrastructure for the billion-dollar wireless industry. It increases the unfair and inequitable distribution of broadband internet services because the wireless technology does not work in rural areas, only in urban areas. The City of Ann Arbor passed a resolution in May to oppose SB 0637 because it would severely preempt the limit of the local regulatory power. The City of Saline should do the same and contacted State Representative Donna Lisinski to urge her to oppose the bill. She is currently neutral. The Oakland County Road Commission sets an example of what is possible without this legislation. This month, it entered into a private agreement with Neo Network to install small cell technology in its rights-of-way and will earn $225,000 to $250,000 annually with no risk to the taxpayers. SB 0637 would prevent your city from being able to do this. The bill will likely get approved by the House Energy Policy Committee if you don't help to stop it. Donna Lisinski is the minority chair of the committee. If passed by the committee, it will be moved to a vote in the House in September. Your action resolution to oppose SB 0637 will build on Ann Arbor's resolution to prevent this from happening. Your immediate action is requested. I have copies of Ann Arbor's position statement and resolution for you to use for your efforts. Thank you for your time, and I have copies of all the documents I
Very
mentioned.
good. If you'd like to provide them to the clerk, we'd be happy to take a look at it. Additional citizen comments? Then please note our upcoming meetings. We've already excused the absence of our council colleague Heidi McClellan, and at this time, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn at 9:30 p.m.
So moved?
Moved by Dillon, seconded by Mitchell. All those in favor of adjourning this meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned.